Okay. Come here.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Okay.
Good job.
Yeah, but how do I get?
Got a few people
Just
showing up.
fine, thank you.
I've been getting some texts that, people were having trouble getting on. Well, that's because we weren't here yet. So some folks like to get here early, it seems.
How can I check it?
Yeah, okay, okay. All right. So it's Wednesday. Guess what we're talking about today?
I don't
Anybody got a
know.
clue? Come on.
Mixed media.
Well, we're going to be talking about painting again.
Painting, of course.
Yeah, painting, mixed media. And one of the things we're going to be looking at a specific type of painting today. It's called Trump oil. Okay. Anybody have any ideas what that actually means? No.
I've heard it before, but I don't know exactly what it is.
I heard you saying something. I couldn't make out what it was, John.
Did you say
I've heard
Trump?
the term, but I'm really not sure what it is.
Okay. All right. Well, here's what Trump oil means. All right. What it actually means is to fool the eye. Okay.
Oh.
It's to fool
What was that again?
Trump oil. It's a French term, and it actually means to fool the eye. And so it was like a very, very early form of what we would now call hyperrealism, right? And it goes back really to the time of the Flemish painters. And right after the Renaissance, artists started producing, particularly in Dutch countries, German countries, things like that, these very elaborate still lifes that were so realistic. It's like you could reach out and pick up the glass or eat the piece of fruit, right? Well, that tradition is carried on, right? And it carried on into America, during the time of the colonies and all the way forward. And even today, there are many artists who still practice, that form of artwork called Trump oil. All right. And I'm going to introduce you to one in particular today, who's a contemporary painter. She's French. Okay. And, I actually met her. I ran into her on Facebook. Okay. And, oh, okay. I need to move some things so I can get to what I need to get to. I either need multiple screens or, I need to figure out a better way of doing this. It's like digging through stuff here. But she's an interesting lady. She's really pretty young. She's probably in her 30s at this point. Okay. And her name would be Dominique Howard is the way he would actually pronounce it, but it's spelled the French way, which is Houard. Okay. And again, she's got some really interesting work. She's been painting now probably 20 to 30 years. And I'm going to share some of her images with you. There she is. Okay. Now, can everybody see the wine bottles?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we're on the right thing, right? Okay, that's good. All right. So I'm just going to kind of run through these real quick. But, she does, these really kind of meticulous paintings, that are well lit. She really works with shadows and things. And interestingly enough, her medium of choice in most of these is pastel. Okay, so it's these pastel chalks that she's doing these, and they're pretty good size. You know, they're large paintings. But if you begin to look at them, you know, they're really quite well done. Yeah. And they're pretty reflective of, you know, living in this century, you know, like the little Lego blocks and things. You're not going to find that in a painting from the 1800s, obviously. But, you know, really nicely done. Now, that piece of wood back there is actually a painting of a piece of wood with this scale in front of it. So this is not really a mixed media approach. You know, they're not collaging things, you know, onto the surface. They're actually taking them and painting them. So even if there's like a scrap of paper or something like that, you know, they're pretty much so, it's all a painted surface.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. And somebody asked about doing like reflective surfaces, you know, glass and stuff like that. And the thing about glass is, for the most part, glass really doesn't have any particular color. It's basically whatever is behind it is going to be the color that you're going to see through the glass. Right? And then it's really just placing the highlights and those, you know, strong shadows, you know, in some of the areas where the glass curves, that begins to give it that effect of being glass. You know, there's a little something about world travel. And it's really nicely done. And again, you know, remember, these are done in pastel. And so, you know, she's working with these blocks and sticks of colored pigment, you know, and actually drawing it on the surface. And, you know, she keeps these very sort of simple, kind of pristine surfaces. So her working process is, you know, it's gotta be, you know, pretty tight. I'm getting, let's see, okay. Evidently, some people are having trouble getting on this morning. We are what?
This is Bob. I have a question.
Yeah.
What kind of paper is she using? Is she using the heavy textured, almost like sandpaper
Yeah, I don't think
pastel,
so.
or is it?
Yeah,
Is it-
I think she's probably working on like what we would call a Bristol board.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a plate finished Bristol board. You know, because everything that she does is really smooth looking. You know, you
Right.
just a little bit of tooth. So it I'm guessing it's something like a Bristol board. You know, there are papers out there by like Strathmore that have that kind of plate finish. She could be also using like what they call museum board, which is almost like a mat board, but it's got an archival paper on it.
Yeah. I found when I've used pastels that it's hard to get it to stick sometimes to keep the color defined unless you have a lot of tooth in the paper.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of artists working with pastels have kind of gone to working on these prepared panels that have like this almost like sandpaper surface to them. Again, because it takes the pastel so well and will hold a lot of medium. But yeah, she's working on a very it's a very smooth surface here with all of these. But, you know, she does some really nice work. And in particular, like the ones that she kind of does these boxes that you see into or that you see through, you know, with the element of perspective. came out real small. Let's see. Come on. Yeah, again, you know, the effect of glass, you know, over the surface. Some flower pots. These, yeah, these are some of her earlier pieces. These are back from the 90s. And again, you know, just working and you know, again, probably large format, you know, pieces, you know, just to get some of the effect of the wood grain and, you know, even the reflection on the metal of the light highlights.
Mm.
And again, you know,
Yeah.
if you begin to look at this carefully, there's, you know, the bottle of perfume and then the different types of apples, and some of the apples are actual real apples. Others are like made out of wood and been turned, or maybe out of, I'm guessing that's probably clay, like a casting of some sort. You know.
Look at the thing. It says, "Mirror, mirror on the
Love it.
wall, who's the fairest of them all?"
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like the poison apple.
Very nice.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Tells
Yeah.
a story.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It tells a story.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing about, you know, still life. Often, you know, you start looking at a still life and you might think it's, you know, a nice painting of apples. But then you start looking at some of the other elements in there and it begins to kind of reveal a different story line that, you know, you can interpret. You know, even this set of, like, you know, pants and the shoes and things. You look at it and, you know, it begins to tell a story, you know, about who she is. You know, this is kind of a portrait, you know, of herself. You know, and these tend to be sort of, I guess where they're really important is they give you a sense of life, you know, during that period of time, you know, things that you would commonly see. You know, you got the Beatles back there and the little figure dolls and, you know, the, what was it, Apple Records, Yellow Submarine. So again, you know, it tends to be a reflection of the time, you know, that she lived in. All right. And yeah, I've got quite a few of these. I'm going to show you a few more, and then we're going to move on to a couple of other artists.
So she created all of these with pastel pencils or chalks.
Well, I think she uses probably both, you know, and probably you can buy, or I have several sets of like pencils that are kind of like a Conte, really, but they're colored, so they're almost like colored pencils, but they work really well with like the pastel chalks for, like, you know, doing like smaller detailed areas. Now, the thing I'll tell you about pastel is, you know, at the Benson Center, you know, I wouldn't allow people to work in pastel. And the reason that I really don't, people are calling me, okay. Yeah, the reason that I don't allow people to work in pastels is because basically what you're handling is, it's a very hazardous material. You know, what you've got is you've got a stick of pure pigment there, but within that pigment you have things like cadmium, lead, arsenic, you know, any kind of toxic chemical that you can think of are in those sticks of pastel. And it's funny, you know, because it's like one of the things that, you know, once kids get past crayons, you know, it's one of the things that a lot of parents go out and as one of the first art materials that they start working with are, you know, handing them boxes of these pastel chalks. And, you know, the thing is they're highly toxic. And one of my pet peeves is the fact that I'll go to some of these figure drawing groups and you'll be in a room with 30 people, you know, and people have oil paint, acrylic, watercolor, you know, be drawing different things. And you'll have one or two artists who will show up with their boxes of pastels. Now, you know, before they start working, they'll put on gloves, a gown, a respirator, a hat.
My goodness.
You know, I mean, they'll totally cover themselves and they'll stand there and work, you know, around 30 other people and use this material, knowing full well how hazardous they are, you know, and that kind of gets me a little bit out of shape. You know, because I actually had a good friend who was a fellow artist, and he was a fairly young guy. He was only in like late 30s, and he actually died from overdose and exposure to heavy metals in the pastels.
Wow.
And you know, he used them all the time, and he did these big, huge, you know, pastel drawings. And you know, over the years, it took about, you know, 20 years, but it ended up killing him. You know, he ended up actually dying. So I really caution people, you know, with using pastels. And if you're going to use them, you need to be in a well-ventilated area. But the other thing is you really need to be wearing like a mask, maybe not a respirator, but at least a face mask to stop from breathing that dust, because it does. It will create dust. It will float around in the air, and it will get on different surfaces, things like that. So you can't eat around it. You can't drink around it. You know, it's like if you're going to do pastels, you really need to have an area that you can, you know, keep fairly clean and blocked off from the rest of your house. Because again, those heavy metals will kind of just filter through the air and end up everywhere. Okay.
What is the benefit of using pastels? What do the artists like about the pastels?
Well, mainly they're just fun. It's, if you know, most of us as artists, you know, the thing that we loved was to be able to draw, right? And, you know, picking up a paintbrush and putting paint down, that can be fun. But there's a direct connection between the artist and what they're doing when you've got this piece of chalk in your hand and you're actually making marks on the paper. I think so. It's a very fun process. And, you know, for a lot of people, they just like the tactile quality of it. But also, there's something also about the color. And the color of these pastels is rich and vibrant, and it's a lot easier to control, I think, than paint. So there's a lot of advantages to working with it, but you just have to be extremely careful with it. And beyond that, it's like once the piece is done, you know, they tend to be rather expensive to frame and to present, you know, in a show, because you've got to, you know, put them in a frame. You've got to have a spacer. You've got to have the glass over them. And you can't just put a piece of like regular framed glass over it. You know, you've got to use something that is UV protective and something that is non-glare. Otherwise, you know, while people is trying to see your work, you know, in a gallery, all they're going to see is like their reflection and hot spots and stuff like that. So there's a lot of extra steps and care you know, in working with this medium. And, you know, it can be, for me, you know, it's, even though I love using them, you know, it's a lot of extra work and a lot of extra things that you have to think about, you know. And the nice thing about oil paint is, you know, you can go in there, you can mix a color, you can put it up on the canvas, and a day or two later, depending on how much oil and how much extender you've got in the oil paint itself, you know, you can still go back in there and manipulate it, you know, and move it and play with it. And then once it's dry and finished, you put a varnish on it, you put it in a frame, you're done with it. You don't have to put glass and things on it. So
What about, Charles, what about charcoal? Is there a danger with it? And
no, charcoal is carbon, you know, that's all it is. You know, so it's an inert material. It's not toxic. You could actually eat charcoal and it won't hurt you, okay? And in fact, some people do. You know, they recommend it for people with, you know, digestive issues and things like that. You know, you can actually get charcoal tablets. You can get charcoal tablets for your dog, you know, because a lot of times dogs will have gas, right? You know, kind of smells bad. So you start giving them charcoal tablets. That seems to go away.
what about the toxicity in oil paint? I've heard that can be dangerous too.
It can be. It can be. And, you know, again, you know, you think of these art materials as being something that, you know, it's kind of fun, and you don't really think about, you know, the side effects and the dangers of it. But if you work with a lot of oil paint, and particularly in the days when artists would actually make their own paint, and they were, you know, grinding these stones and things, these minerals up, you know, a lot of them got exposure to cadmium poisoning and, you know, arsenic, you know, all the different lead, you know, all that different stuff. And it killed a lot of it. So you've got to be careful. Today, you know, because we go basically to the art store and we buy stuff in a tube and it's stored there in the tube, for the most part, it's pretty safe, all right? Now, I don't recommend that you eat your roast beef sandwich, you know, while you're sitting there painting, okay, with paint all over your hands. Probably not a great idea, okay? I also don't recommend that you stick your finger in your cup and stir your coffee, you know, with a finger that's covered in paint either. It doesn't add to the taste of it. But again, you know, things like that will, you know, again, you know, those heavy metals, things like that can get into, you know, get into the air, get into food and things that you're eating around that area. And, you know, even into the air. You know, a lot of things, one of the things that with oil paint in particular, people are really sensitive to are the fumes. And back in the good old days, you know, when I first started painting, one of the things I really liked about oil painting was I would go into Tony Manning's studio, and it's like you get hit right in the face with this overwhelming smell of this turpentine. And back in the day, you know, they would actually put like a citrus, you know, smell into the turpenoid or the turpentine at that time. You know, so that you knew that there were fumes around, right? But you could walk into that studio and like almost immediately get high, you know, just breathing the air. You know, for, you know, an 11, 12-year-old kid, that was kind of fun. So I always look forward to that. But, you know, you do have to be careful. Now, even with like using odorless thinners, just because they're odorless doesn't mean that they don't give off fumes, and they do, right? And so, again, you still have that same problem. You need good ventilation where you're working. Don't work in a small, closed-up room, you know, and if you don't have a space that's well ventilated, then make sure to keep fans and things working to keep circulating the air around, because it's really easy to let the levels of fumes get to the point in that room to where it can really start affecting your health, right? So do be careful about that, Any other questions about the dangers of, playing around with art materials? No? Okay.
Charles, this is Bob again.
Yeah.
I just sent you an old pastel that I did. And, it's an interesting piece.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, hopefully I'll get it and we can look at it this afternoon. All right. So anyway, this is Miss Howard's work. Okay, Dominique Howard, and again, she's a French artist. Does some nice stuff. Right? But I'm going to show you a couple of other people who practice this thing that they call trump oil. All right. So yeah. Let's go back. All right. All right, you guys seen kind of a still life of some papers, looks like sheets of music. And,
Yes.
okay. All right. 'Cause that's what I clicked on. Okay. So this is, what is it? I want to say William Michael Harnett. Okay. Harnett lived from about the 1840s through, I think it was about, it was like 1849. And he lived into the 1900s. Anyway, he was one of the key practitioners of this particular type of painting, called trump oil. And he's probably, probably one of the better known artists, practicing this type of artwork. Now you can definitely see a difference, between his work and Dominique's work, in the sense that Dominique's tended to be generally kind of light in color. She was also working in pastel, and he worked primarily in oil. But a lot of his pieces tend to be kind of dark, kind of dark, heavy backgrounds. A lot of interesting objects, different themes like hunting, music. I thought this was one of the, kind of more interesting pieces. And this is one of the few, probably one of the few pieces that I've ever seen of his where he did a human figure. And so, again, this is a little more typical, of his work. Still life, still life was one of those areas of, painting that were real popular in different parts of history. As I said, it kind of started really in the Renaissance, mainly in Northern Europe, with the Dutch and German painters. Did a lot of these, very realistic, still lives. But then, it carried on, into the Baroque period and all the way through like a very traditional, the academic period in France, came to the United States and England, and there were painters who practiced it pretty much so all around the world. Now, Harnett originally was Irish, and he immigrated to America, and he's known as an American painter. But again, you know, really nicely done pieces. And then I'm going to run you through some contemporary stuff that's still being done today. Now, these are a little bit different. And again, I just kind of want you to notice the difference in kind of the look and feel of these from, you know, like Harnett's work. Now, this is Banksy. Anybody familiar with Banksy?
He's the one that goes out and puts all these artworks out, and nobody knows who he is.
Right. Well, they did.
And then they end up being extremely valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, he's known as a street artist.
Street
right?
artists, yes. Mhm.
And so he will do a lot of these things with stencils and spray paint. And again, you know, he'll do them in the middle of the night.
Yes.
You know, he'll go out, he'll find a wall, and he'll do one of these pieces of artwork, you know, on that wall. And the thing is, it had gotten so bad that literally, you know, people were tearing out the walls of
Yes.
buildings to take his artwork.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
not their building, but they wanted
Yes.
a piece of artwork, so they would go out there and, you know, cut a big chunk out of the wall and go walk off with it.
Oh,
you know.
goodness.
So it got to be pretty bad. But now his artwork tends to be very kind of political, you know, and you know, kind of theme driven. You know, if you look at this image, you know, you have this little African American, well, you know, girl, and you know, she's spray painting this pattern, you know, over, you know, this swastika, right? Which is kind of a statement about fascism, I guess. So that's one example. This is Dwayne Hanson. Now, this is actually a painting, okay? And so it's kind of like hyper real. And, you know, it's him and a model. Lovely, you know, plastic trash bags. See, you know, and again, you know, today we look at that and go, oh, okay, I know what that is. You know, it's a really common thing that we would see, right? And that's the thing about Trump Oil, is that a lot of this stuff is kind of mundane stuff. You know, here you have a grocery store, you know, wall full of noodles, but if you'll please notice that somewhere there toward the center, you begin to see a figure, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has these noodles painted over it, you know, so that, you know, he just blends in with the actual noodles, right?
There's nude there?
Well, yeah, it's a human figure, and he's painted the noodles on the human figure to make him disappear into that actual wall of,
Oh, now I see it.
yeah.
There was a program that used to come on that had this, where they would take and paint people along with some type of items. And one woman was on a thing of fruit,
Uh-huh.
with all kind of vegetables and fruit on it. And she was laying there, but you couldn't see her at first. And
Right.
then, you know, you could see her.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, there's a fairly vibrant community of artists and performers now who do these body paint events,
Yeah.
and they'll do, you know, these fantastic, you know, body paintings. And, you know, these people are totally nude, but you wouldn't know it, you know, because, I mean, everything's sort of disguised, you know, covered up. you know, right in the midst of all that. Now this is more of a kind of a traditional, again, you know, it's a painted surface, but it's not on a two-dimensional surface. You know, it's actually on kind of a box type shape. And, you know, they've painted all those surfaces.
It's a box of books.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not. You know, it's just flat panels, but it looks like a box of
I
books.
know.
Here's a guy who does fast food. Okay,
That makes you hungry.
makes you hungry.
Some restaurant would like to buy that.
Who would like to buy that?
A restaurant.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're, you know, like Whataburger or something like that, that would probably, you know, do well. Or a diner, that would probably be a good piece of artwork in a big diner, particularly like the Buckhead Diner, you know, places like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would fit that theme pretty well. Here's an interesting piece. This was a gentleman by the name of Will Wilson, and this is a African-American musical theme. And the interesting thing about this painting was he started, what, in 1990. He finished the painting in 1999. You know,
Fabulous.
and this is not a huge painting, but, you know, just, you know, a lot of stuff in there. And, you know, the people, the expressions, the gestures, you know, the details of like the keyboard and, you know,
Their hair.
yeah, the hair, you know, even the environment, you know, it looks like they're downstairs in kind of like a basement area or something, you know, and they've got the band together, you know, like on a Tuesday or a Thursday night, you know, and they're doing their music thing, right? And, you know, beautifully painted figures. And again, you know, in Trump oil, you know, figurative art is not one of those traditional things that you see in Trump oil. It's mainly still lives. But I really like this guy's, you know, take on it, in that he incorporated human figures, and just a really beautiful painting.
It is.
So is Trump oils always in pastels?
No, you can use Trump oil with oil, and for the most part, most painters who use that approach are oil painters. But you know, there's you know, a lot of contemporary painters are using acrylic now to do these as well.
So does that Trump oil just softens the picture?
No, not necessarily. It's again, what it means is to fool the eye.
To fool the eye.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's like hyperrealism. It's like they want you to look at it and it's like you're looking at a photograph or you're looking at the real thing, right? Is the idea here. So, you know, and certainly, you know, he's done a very convincing rendition, you know, of these people and these figures, you know, standing in this space. So, but anybody got any questions about any of that? Because we've got like less than a minute. Okay.
I like the you know,
I like
because at first glance it looks like a photo until you really look at it, and then you see
Yeah.
that it's not.
Maybe you'll have to do a Trump oil for us sometime,
Okay.
so we can see how to fool the eye
Or
by
Yeah,
demonstration.
exactly.
Or maybe,
yes.
Claudia, maybe you can take on doing one.
Next statement question.
Look, if I started a Trump oil painting today, you know, by the time this whole pandemic thing is over and all, you have a piece finished.
A question.
Yeah.
I see. Should you put on your painting when you started and when you finished?
Do what now?
Just put it if you put your time on your painting. Should you put the date you started and the date that you finished, or just when you finished?
I usually do on the back. And I have a couple of
Okay.
paintings where I've actually worked on on them over a period of